Hi, I'm Roy Collin, the host of the podcast. You can find everything about me by scanning the QR code there or going to roycollin.com, and you'll find my six podcasts: the Podfather, helping people become podcasters; the Awakening, exposing fraud and corruption but with solutions; the Crypto, all things blockchain technology; meditation podcast; speaking podcast; and the Learn Polish podcast. You can also help the show by actually making a donation, visiting the store, or helping my sponsors. I hope you enjoyed this week's show. Welcome to the Speaking Podcast. You can find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. Today, I'm actually really looking forward to this because based on a book that I've read and just what he's done, but I'll give you a little tip. Sometimes people kind of claim that, oh, I got a bad look in life. This person was homeless at 13, but that didn't stop him and just kind of, use that as a crutch to life. He's patented inventor, three books, award-winning author with a lot of awards. He wrote songs for Disney, worked for a lot of the big companies, IBM, Oracle, Microsoft, and others. But you weren't in the photocopying room just photocopying it to have something on your CV. You actually had high positions. And this is one of the books that I kind of went into a swarm, but you've got three others. Please welcome to the show, Guy Morris.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Such a pleasure.
So I suppose, we're going to delve into that book, but let's start off with the kind of journey. Like, how did you become homeless at such a young age?
Well, it very violent home life that led to a particular episode where I try not to go into it too much. But where I had to shoot my stepfather, and I didn't kill him. It was a warning shot, but he threatened to basically put me in juvenile hall. And I panicked and basically in my pajamas ran off that night. It was 2:00 in the morning. It had been an abusive, violent, horrible situation for years. I knew that if I went back, he would kill me or he would try. So I left. I didn't feel like I had any choice. It was terrifying. It was humiliating. It was just all sorts of things that I would never want on my worst enemy. And when I see people in Gaza being displaced from their homes, my heart breaks because I know what it's like when you have no idea where the next meal is going to come from. You have no idea where you're going to sleep. You have no idea who to trust. You're in this sense of chaos in your life that lasts from the time you wake up to the time you try to fall asleep. It was a difficult time. I was able to get work. I worked alongside migrant workers because if you could just show up at 4:00 in the morning when the truck would come by to pick up the worker at the corner, you could usually get some work, and I needed to eat. So I learned perseverance. I learned hard work. I learned to respect other cultures. I learned a sense of independence that it wasn't anyone's job to make my life easy. It was my job to make my life what I could. And so it was a very tough beginning, but I feel blessed. I feel like God has really taken my life through a number of transitions. It wasn't the way I would have wanted to start. I've often thought, gee, how much farther could I have gotten if I had come from a good environment and didn't have all of that baggage to carry with me throughout my whole life? Because it's hard to go through something like that and not be affected. In fact, it wouldn't be until my 50s when I was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress from that time frame up until then. And so I've had to deal with it quite a bit throughout my life. But I never wanted, early on, I made a vow to myself not to let my past define my future. And it wasn't a frivolous sort of self-vow as we sometimes make to ourselves, like I'm going to quit eating chocolate the new year, and we never do. Because, let's face it, changing your life is one thing, but giving up chocolate, that's a whole nother thing. Um, but it was certainly something that stuck with me for several decades.
So, like, you mentioned, what would you turn off? Maybe it was the hardship in your youth that made you who you were.
I think to a great extent, it did define me. I mean, I even in corporate life, I was always obsessively one of the hardest working people, even at a Microsoft where people traditionally work 80 hours a week. I would always be one of the hardest workers. For years, my teammates called me the machine because I just wouldn't allow myself to turn off until I just had no other choice. And it did. It taught me, but it also taught me it grounded me in a sense of morality too. It grounded me in the sense of the haves and the have-nots, that when I would work along people who were incredibly wealthy and powerful, I never bought into the narrative about the lazy poor person or the undocumented worker trying to steal our jobs, or I never could buy into any of those narratives because that was me. I was that person. And so I thought, you're incredibly blessed to have come from a good family and you're incredibly blessed to be here. That doesn't necessarily mean that people who haven't had those blessings aren't just as worthy. But I had to hide a lot of that because in that type of environment, especially when you're rising up through the ranks and you're trying to always go for that latest review and promotion and opportunity, it's a mistake to show a sign of weakness, and a difficult childhood that led into other issues is a sign of weakness. And so I went most of my career, almost my entire career, basically living two lives: my professional life, and then dealing with my personal issues on my own time. So it taught me a lot to how to survive, how to persevere, as I mentioned, and just how to apply myself. That nothing was impossible if I would just if I could put my head down. It might be improbable, but not impossible, and that whatever my future would be, I had to work at making it so. And it was tough lessons, but I'm grateful for it. I don't have a lot of bitterness. I don't talk about it in a bad way of, I got a bad rap, and I did compared to others, but I feel like it was an opportunity to strengthen me and give me some skills and some things inside that most people I think sometimes strive to get, and he can't.
And based on your journey, I mean, I grew up in council housing and seen a lot of bad things over the years and everything. And I mean, I kind of done well with working for companies, but I never judged anybody. And I'd say you're probably the same. That whether you're talking to the CEO of a company, I mean, I've spoke to even billionaires, and it's like, or the cleaner, I have so much respect because people look at it as if like, they're a cleaner, they're on $3 an hour. And it's like, that's a hard job. And you can even see the ones that really care for it. And like, I think with all the craziness that's going on in the world, that we kind of have to have compassion for everybody, because you see some people and they grovel for the CEO or the managing director, and they'll look down on a waitress, or they look down on a cleaner, or somebody collecting the rubbish. And it's like, yeah, somebody has to collect the rubbish, and you should never look down on people. Like, and I reckon, with your journey,
I actually had some of my closer friends were the janitors. I had when I was at one of the oil company, when I was at the oil company, actually, I was reporting to the CXO and the VPs, but the guy that I would go sailing with on the weekend was the janitor. And so because he was a lot more approachable, I didn't have to put on airs with him. I didn't have to pretend to be anything with him. He was a funny guy. He was a great guy. We're still friends today. He just lives a few miles from here, as it turns out. So, yes, some of my closest relationships weren't with the senior executives, and in part because there was a part of me that never felt like I belonged. There was always a part of me that felt like I'm a poser, that if they really knew where I'd come from and who I really was, they wouldn't be here. Now they probably still would, because I did excellent work. and always really made every effort humanly possible to be excellent at everything I did. So I'm sure I would have gotten some recognition, but that was not where my heart was. My heart really gravitated towards more humbler and more open and heartfelt people.
So the patents, what patents have you done?
Yeah. Well, the patents dealt with it was early on in the transition between in the video community. I wanted to, I had worked on a show format. The idea was to be able to put consumers, using a webcam, put consumers in a produced content. So imagine, if you will, James Bond. It's a commercial for James Bond movie, and you see all these action things, and he walks into this casino at Monaco, and he walks up to the bar, and he says, "Martini, shaken not stirred." And Roy turns around and hands him a martini and says, "Your martini, Mr. Bond." And that's it. But it's the ability to basically use produced content, use virtual green screening technology and controlled edit formats to basically integrate people into more highly produced kind of content. Now, that content could be a commercial. That content could be an interview for a corporation where you're interviewing a virtual interviewer, as it were. You basically have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You've got 30 seconds to answer this question, or a minute to answer the question, or whatever. Or we were actually envisioning interactive television shows where you could actually be a sub character, not the main character, but you could create your own sub character with your friends, and you could have a scene that was partly you and partly a friend, and so it created more engagement with the show and the content and the story and the narratives and the themes. It was a bad timing. It came out at 2009, 2010, when the market had been crashing. I had left Microsoft. I was looking for investors. I could get the technology only to a conceptual stage, a prototype stage, with my own money. But I was going to need investors in order to really build this out to scale. And we had Disney interested in the technology, and Subway, and a couple of other companies, a film company. But at the end of the day, I couldn't get the investors, and it was just a bad timing in the market. People were really looking for very quick and easy cash payback. They didn't want anything that was long-term or risky. And so I had to kind of put it in a bucket and had to go lick my wounds and go back and get another real job and continue to get myself towards retirement. But it was great. It was a great idea. It was just a really bad time.
And I believe the FBI were knocking on your door. You must let me know, what was that about?
Oh, that was a completely different incident. That happened a few years before that. I had to, now, for those who, just as a little bit of background, my entire career, even before I graduated college, was using technology for innovations. I have a minor in computer science. I have a master's in economics. I have an MBA, got a degree in finance. And in order to go, before I'd even graduated my undergrad, I had designed and built a macroeconomic computer model. So this is a computer model that forecasts things like gross national product and unemployment and interest rates and some of the key variables of an economy. And my model had outperformed every bank in the U.S., including the Federal Reserve, and by a wide margin. And so that got the attention of the Federal Reserve. It got me a scholarship to go to graduate school, got me accepted into the Harvard MBA program, got me my first job at IBM. And so I was always good at innovating technologies. And one of the technologies that I started working with very early on was something that would eventually be called artificial intelligence. And it wasn't even called that when I started working on it. It was about that time, not too long after that, that in reading a technical journal of, I can't remember which it was a magazine, but I can't remember which one at this point. I stumbled on a really short little article. The article basically said that a program had escaped the Lawrence Livermore laboratories. Pretty much all it said. There was a second paragraph that said, if I knew something, I could contact this professor at the laboratory or this FBI agent in charge of the investigation. My mind was intrigued, to say the least. It didn't say it was lost, stolen, or broken. The verb it used was escaped, and that caught my attention. So I spent close to a year, because I just have that weird, geeky mind, trying to figure out for myself how could a program be architected? It couldn't be based on some technology that hadn't been invented yet. It had to be based on the technologies that existed at the time. It might be lab level technology, but I had access to some of that. And so I spent a while trying to figure out exactly how a program could escape the laboratory. Now, that laboratory happened to be an NSA spy lab. So it's the same laboratory that produced the Stuxnet virus that wandered the internet for years until it found itself in Iran at a uranium centrifuge purification site. And then it turned on and basically caused all those centrifuges to spin out of control and sabotage the site. So this is the same lab that's producing some of the most sophisticated cyber software that we've ever seen. And so I was very curious, and I spent a year figuring it out. And then I spent a few more months trying to say, once I figured out architecturally how it could work, I tried to figure out, okay, what did the NSA design this to really do that needed that interesting special technology of being invisible? And I produced it. When I did, I went to a friend of mine who was a film producer, and I said, hey, I've got a great idea for a film. And we decided to turn it into a webisode series. Now, at the time, the webisode series, so it's almost a fictional type of narrative which includes this program, and which I named the Sylvia. So you're familiar with the Sylvia from the book. And that all this actually inspired that book. And we were doing really well. We had fans all over the world. We had fans in China and Europe and UK and Israel, and even the NASA, the space agency in the United States, the director of flight operations was a big fan. And we got optioned by one of the studios. I was super excited. I thought, this is it. I'm going to leave tech world. I'm going to go into the entertainment world. And 2 weeks before the option was to be signed by the studio, 2 FBI agents showed up at my door. They were rather upset that I had figured out something they thought for sure should have been top secret, and grilled the heck out of me trying to figure out how I knew so much. And I basically showed them all my work papers and said, I'm sorry, I'm a geek. You guys let this slip. And I said, you didn't want anybody to know, you shouldn't have let it slip. And they were very upset. Now, what bothered them even more than me knowing was my snarky attitude, because I was like, yes, I did it. I figured it out. Oh, man, this is so cool. Hey, come on, boys, admit it. You wouldn't be here if I was wrong. Oh, man, this is great. I can't wait to tell all my friends. and they got pale. They looked at each other. I got the weird, not amused speech, but at the end of the day, I said, what are you going to do? Bust me for being a smart ass. I said, listen, if you guys didn't want me to know about it, you should have let it slip. And if you're bothered that I figured it out, give me a job, They didn't like that either. So they went to the studio and killed the deal. They got the studio to basically back out of it. And so I lost a little bit of money on that, and I had to tuck my tail between my legs and go get a real job after that. I can't remember if it was Oracle or a startup. I think it might have been a startup. But I never forgot that incident, and it impressed me that they were aware enough to know what was going on, to know that I had figured it out. And it got me really obsessed with these sets of technologies that the government we were building them for commercial purposes, and we were very familiar with the commercial purposes of these things. And it got me really tuned into, if I were the government and I wanted to do, and I had government types of espionage goals, how would I be using these same technologies that we're trying to build for commercial purposes? And that's kind of what led to when I retired from Microsoft about 6 years ago, and wanted to become an author. That was one of the first stories I pulled out of the hopper to recreate.
And like you just kind of throw it out, I decided to become an author. But I mean, I read 100 books a year. You're a fantastic author. Like, that book is brilliant. And the thing is, it's 2020, so I presume you wrote it in maybe 2019.
I started researching it in 2018 and making sure that I could stay current with that, be accurate with all my references, my technology. I do an obsessive amount of research, piles of paper, hundreds of files. And and I started really writing it by 2019. And by 2020, it was basically published in November 2020. It was during the time of all the political, I don't even want to call it disruption. It was nightmare happening in the United States for some of us. So we were watching our country slip into fascism and a dictator, and I was very concerned that he was going to win again, as I am now. I'm worried that even after everything that's happened, he still has sycophants that will follow him to whatever ends. So to me, it's a very much of a crisis stage for our democracy, and I want it to in addition to this technology and what governments are doing with these technologies, including weapons systems and other things. I want to kind of put that in context to a unstable leader, right? It's not that technology is good or bad by itself, but it's how we use it that can make all the difference in the world. And a really good AI in the bad hands of a bad person can be a very destructive thing.
Oh, like, I mean, I have so many different things that you've covered in the book, which I think, I mean, I probably wouldn't have, like, I've always kind of knowing a lot of the stuff that's going on, but since kind of 2020 went way deeper down the rabbit hole. And I think with the book, you're kind of talking about a lot of things that I think people should know about, but they don't really. So, like DARPA, you're talking about DARPA. And most people, if you mention DARPA, they don't know. So you might just, and say, like the Bilderberg Group and things like that. So you might just kind of give people an idea of what's going on with the way you're mentioning these things.
Well, DARPA, for those who don't know, is the Department Defense Advanced Projects Agency, and they do essentially they use very advanced technologies to further America's goals in weapon systems and in espionage and in all of those kind of covert systems that nobody's supposed to know exist, but somehow crop up in the literature anyway. And so DARPA is a very interesting place to go. And actually, the laboratory that I mentioned earlier, the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, is a DARPA lab that's used for research for the NSA. So they're basically signals analysis and cryptology. And so DARPA is a very, if you wanted to kind of call it a mad scientist agency, I think that would probably not be too far from the truth. They have a lot of incredibly brilliant people, and all they do all day long is take advanced technologies and figure out how to use those to further the goals of a country. And so it is a little bit, it is an interesting, certainly, topic and hard to research because they're very closed off in terms of a lot of the details. But every once in a while, you can stumble onto some real nuggets. And if you're willing to do the homework to figure out what that nugget means behind the scenes, you know, how could they get to that nugget? Like similar to what I did when I learned that, when most people read that article and I showed the article to my friend that a program had escaped the Lawrence Livermore laboratories, he thought, well, that's weird. But that was kind of where he left it. Gee, that seems strange. Maybe it's a typo. And, because the idea of the program escaping as opposed to being lost or stolen or broken just seems, kind of, what? And I had that initial impression. And my first thought was, maybe this is a typo. This must be a typo. And then the more I thought about it, I said, now, wait a minute. Why does it have to be a typo? Maybe I'm just not thinking about this correct way. And so understanding when you're researching something like DARPA, you've got to go through and take those little gems of nuggets that you can find on the surface, and you got to drill deep, and you've got to really try to think in terms of what are the technologies they're using, what are the architectures they're using, how would I put on my best James Bond Q mindset to figure out something to do with this that James Bond would want to use or something like that. You're going through a lot of mental games to say, now let me get into the mindset of these DARPA scientists and see if I can figure out what they were thinking. Now, the Bilderberg Group is a fascinating. So most people, you're right, don't understand what DARPA is. So I try to spell it out in the book. Any acronyms I use, I try to spell out and explain so that you have an understanding. And DARPA is working on some AI weapon systems today that are worrisome, to say the least. And I don't want to go into the details because some of that's in the book. And now, but the Bilderberg one is a common, for those who are versed in their conspiracy theories, is one of the major ones. It really has its roots in many ways in the Templar legacies and the Templar mythology. And when the Templars were broken up in 1309 out of France, they split really into two major groups. One major group went to Scotland, where you get some of the things that you see in the Da Vinci Code with the Rosslyn Chapel and some of the Scottish Rite, Freemasons, cultures that really kind of permeated Europe for hundreds of years and still do. And then the other group went to Spain, or Portugal rather, and set up shop in Portugal and started developing a lot of the different types of groups. And there is a group called the Bilderberg Group, and they started in 1957, I want to believe it was, and it was started by one of the princes of Norway, and it's a very super elite set of people, the kind of people that never show up in the news because they make sure their names never show up in the news. But wealth beyond what we can imagine, the old money in Europe that kind of never went away. And this group has an annual meeting every year. The meeting is in secret. The agenda is in secret. The attendees are in secret. A number of people have tried to break into these meetings and figure out who some of those people are. They stand at a distance and try and use telescopic lenses to get pictures of some of the attendees. But presidents, prime ministers, world bankers, international CEOs, it's the elite of the elite. And the group controls, that's also the same group from which we get the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission and the World Bank and some of these other international organizations that don't really fall under any particular governmental oversight because they're set up as international groups. And this one group controls 127 corporations, and from those 127 corporations, those corporations have controlling interests either in their industry or for just about every other corporation in Europe and America. And so it's a very, very powerful group. And so when we talk about the cult of the Illuminati, it's sort of, the Illuminati is a term that really hasn't been used in vogue since the 18th century. But the organizations, the thinking, the culture, the belief systems that prompted all of those things still exist, and they still have a very strong presence and control in the current world. Roughly 40% of the U.S. presidents have been Freemasons. Roughly 50% or 60% of the Israeli prime ministers have been Freemasons, and most people don't understand that. Many of the leaders in NATO and in the EU have that heritage as well. And so it's not something that we can just dismiss as, well, it's just people being part of a social club. But again, finding the real details of what's going on, trying to trace that back through the history and the roots. There's a lot of books. Some of them I think are more speculative than others. Some of them actually do stumble onto some solid research and connection points between all of these various secretive organizations. But when you're dealing with ultimately secretive organizations, you have to have a little bit of speculation in terms of what their real purpose is and how are they going about doing it. And so I built some of that in because I think it's relevant to our current age, and it's relative to understanding prophecy and a lot of the context there. So I try to do research on it again. It's a fascination of mine, but being from the corporate world and knowing how, if you really want to know how corporation is run, you just simply need to look at the histories and the backgrounds of the boards of directors. And so when I was in business, I was involved in mergers and acquisitions. And so one of the first things that we would do is we would take everybody from the board level down to all the executive levels, and we would profile those individuals, find out their background, their affiliations, their beliefs, where they went to school, who their buddies with, what their technical background was, their education, where else do they sit on other boards and have other influences in other places. And we would try to create that picture because those are ultimately the people that we're going to have to negotiate with and the people we had to find a way to purchase or merge with that company without spending too much. And so we were trying to find those balances or those synergies with those individuals. So it was through that training that I got to start thinking about some of the people that we do know about in the Bilderberg. And we only know about maybe a couple dozen handfuls of people that are regulars at these meetings. And then each year they invite guests. And if you're invited to a Bilderberg meeting, that's a pretty, several of the presidents of the United States 2 years before they became president were basically invites at the Bilderbergs. So these are groups that have a tremendous amount of influence on our day-to-day lives. But they keep themselves invisible because it's easier to be a tyrant when you're invisible than it is when you're visible, because then people want to bring up their sticks and their bows and arrows and fight against you. But it's a very fascinating history, and I wouldn't say that I'm the most versed expert on it. It's something that I'm continually fascinated with every book. But I did some research and decided that I would pull them into this scenario because you're also as a narrative, as a storyteller, I'm always looking for not just who the bad guy is, but who's the bad guy behind the bad guy. And those to me are the more interesting layers of stories where it's not just one guy being a rogue crazy nut. It's where's that guy getting his power? Where's he getting his money? Where's he getting his influence? Those I think are the more true to life stories, and I think they're the more interesting ones to read.
Fascinating. And I remember 20 years ago, there was somebody I knew that was a Mason, and there was an open house, and I went to it. It was in Cork in Ireland. And I remember, like, it was just one meeting, and I was like, I think they had up to 11 degrees or whatever. And I was like, not impressed. You know, the way you talk to somebody and you kind of, this guy's really intelligent and everything, like yourself, you're listening to your life story and everything, and you go, okay, this is somebody I'm impressed with. I didn't get that, so that was the end of that. I didn't go to it. But what I have come across is I've got somebody else that I know very well, and he's like, it's not like that. It's not bad. It's like all we did was charity and everything. I know this guy is a really good guy. I reckon that there is Freemasons that's what they were doing, just charity to kind of make them not look so bad. And there's others that I was told, somebody I know, because there was kind of family members in it, that's kind of the father, the grandfather, and they were doing kind of really weird stuff, like to get going up the ranks, kind of masturbating in front of people and all weird stuff being buried, and so that stuff goes on as well. So there's two different, because some people go, no way. And I think...
Well, yeah, there is. And I think they do keep a real good public face by doing their charity work. But that's not all they do. And that's not the real They don't get together and say, hey, let's just do charity work. There is a cult. There is a cult teaching that goes into all of that. And I think to some extent, the more local chapters, I view those as recruiting chapters. They're having these chapters. They're recruiting people into their cult thinking, which is sort of a very agnostic sort of kind of thinking, combining kind of religions, various religions with a lot of cultism. But they actually find the really great individuals out of those local chapters, and that's how these people go from small towns into prime ministers, and because they're basically being groomed within these organizations, and similar to the way universities do, similar to the way corporations do. I mean, you don't find great people to lead your organization. You can't be 100% secretive. You have to basically open it up to some extent to pull people in. But then the farther up the ranks you get, the more secretive it becomes and the little bit more bizarre it becomes.
Yeah. And like, I know there's a lot of the information that you go, how come they're putting this out there? Like NIH, even on the kind of what's happened in the last few years, like you can actually find where they're saying, we planned this, we manipulated the media and everything, because apparently like they believe in karma and they say, we've told you, so it's on you. And is that your kind of experience as well?
I certainly think they believe in karma would actually fit within their belief systems, yeah. But I think that their motives are really more of a. Now, I think the beginning of a lot of this was wanting to have a world culture that was less driven by some of the religious fanaticism that existed through much of the last 1,000 years. And so they wanted to use enlightenment. They wanted to use sciences and other things to basically broaden that. But I think ultimately their goals have morphed into sort of a world domination and a control, and it's a greed. It's a profit. The more money they have, the more they can control, the more influence and control they have, the more secretive they can stay, the safer they are in their own activities. And so I think there is a kind of, we think we're smarter than the world, and so we're going to lead the world. We got the money, and so we're going to lead the world from behind the scenes, and where there will be these elected officials that the puppets that we use, and we'll tell you who we promote to be, your nominees, because we're going to be the ones financing them. But they're not open and transparent with their motives, the reasons why they're doing these things. And that's actually going to be influencing. I'm going to bring that influence back in my next book quite a bit. We're going to be talking about the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset agenda of the World Economic Forum. And the World Economic Forum is just one of the other international organizations that derive their power and their influence from this Bilderberg Group, this secret Bilderberg Group. And the World Economic Forum is proposing, as part of the Great Reset, to basically coming out of the post-pandemic, not only some environmental goals, but they're proposing some more international trade goals and international banking. They actually want to replace the U.S. dollar for international trade as the currency for international trade with a central bank-controlled digital currency that's managed and operated with an AI, with the use of AI. And so they're wanting to essentially have a single bank that controls currencies all around the world. And while there's some economic reasons why they can say, well, this is a benefit. There's some logistics reasons. There's some stability reasons. They say, well, the U.S. isn't as stable as it used to be because of our debt levels and because we have a crazy right-wing group, part of Congress, who keeps threatening to shut down the government. And so because of that instability, they're saying that this is a necessity to really kind of move to a bank-controlled currency. But there's a lot of control issues, and there's a lot of things in that type of proposal that would be, I think, dangerous for a lot of people's freedom and freedom of choices.
Fascinating thing is, I think people are conscious of this now in the last year, but not prior to that.
Yeah.
and you're writing about that in this book, which is kind of like,
3-4 years ago. Yeah.
Because as I was reading the book, I was like, I thought this was 2020, and I thought maybe it was just new, and I was thinking I would see 23. So like you're giving all this information out that's well before a high percentage of people haven't even a clue what's going on.
Well, that was my training in my career. My job was to basically look into the future and try and have us be prepared, right? Corporations always have to look out 5 or 10 years. In the oil industry, it was closer to 20. And to try and say, well, we can't just wait for something to happen and then assume that we're going to get a $500 million or $1 billion of infrastructure ready for it immediately. So that takes preparation and planning and strategic planning. And so my role in strategic planning throughout many of my jobs kind of prepped me for and trained me for some of this thinking of saying, where is it now? But where not only is where the technology going to be in a few years, how does technology evolve in the laboratory and through early products? What kind of applications would it use in the industry and around the world? But how are governments going to respond to this? How are corporations going to respond to this? How are different states going to respond with the competitive nature? How do you look forward into some of these things to project sort of a probable scenario of what might happen? And so I try to take some of that skill set and I try to put it into the books where I'm always taking existing technologies and whether they're existing in the lab or in the marketplace in early stages and trying to project that onto a dynamic world environment and to try and come up with what I hope are plausible and realistic scenarios to say, well, gee, what could go wrong? And I'm trying to use that current world framework to not only pull people into that this could affect them, that it becomes recognizable, it becomes something they can connect to and connect with, but to illustrate how the fragility of our world is higher than many people think, of our current systems. And it wouldn't take a whole lot of things to go wrong in order for things to go very wrong. And so I'm trying to use it as a way to, as I mentioned earlier, to hopefully get people to think more thoughtfully around kind of current events and where we're going at a government level and technology level and a culture level, and kind of look through those and to make personal choices. What does that mean to them? How do they want to respond to all this? How do they want to fit into this larger picture? And so I'm always fascinated by those things because there's so many things going on, especially right now. We live in probably one of the most astounding ages that have ever existed between our technologies and our cultures. The fact that you can be in Poland and we can be talking to each other across, 10,000, 15,000 miles is just astounding. I love it. The technology is amazing and it can do amazing things. And yet we have all of the technology, all of the resources, all of the manpower, all of the know-how to solve every single one of the problems that exist on the planet today, and yet we don't. And I keep asking myself, what are those things that's really holding us back from being that utopia that when in the 60s we thought we would eventually become? What's keeping us from the difference between a Star Trek type of world where everybody has jobs and everybody's meaningful and everybody's we have a kind of we're all united as a planet versus the dystopic zombie kind of environments where everyone's basically just fighting for survival. And I don't ever try to go to the dystopic extreme because I really don't believe that's where we're heading. But I also have a hard time finding us going toward the Star Trek one, giving the nature of human tendencies towards pride and power and greed. And Jurassic Park was a great film, not only because it was really entertaining and they made the dinosaur scene real and terrifying, but Michael Crichton was a genius in how he basically took DNA technology and cloning and tried to extrapolate our scientific curiosity to use this technology to bring back extinct species, which was being actually discussed at the time that the movie came out. and say, what could go wrong when you combine amazing technology with hubris, pride, and greed? And that was really the basic theme of Jurassic Park. Had nothing in it. If we strip it away, it really didn't have to do with dinosaurs per se. That was the vehicle he used, but he was really looking at our culture of ultra rich people basically using technologies to make themselves wealthier, and it was really more of a combination of hubris, pride, and greed that got us there. And so I tried to kind of say, well, what would hubris, pride, and greed look like when we're dealing with artificial intelligence? One of the most powerful technologies we've ever created and we've ever developed. And today, because of ChatGPT and a few other of these AIs are now becoming, the public is becoming more aware of them and more aware of their capabilities. But these are capabilities that have been building over a number of years that didn't just happen overnight. This has been a transition of 3 decades. And so I've been following these technologies for much of that 3 decades. And so it was a question of as these technologies get to that power that we're really starting to see, how are people going to react to that? How not just that the technology is evil or benign, and we are going to have a super intelligence before we know it, probably by 2024, 25 for sure. By 27, 28, we'll probably have a conscious super intelligence. But the question is not about the technology itself, but what does that technology look like when you put it in the hands of a dictator or a warlord or a crime lord or a politician with no morals or a sociopathic billionaire who's got it. And we all have an idea of who one is, right? We all have our favorite one. And so the question is not that is the technology bad? The question I'm trying to ask is what happens with this technology when it's in the wrong hands? And those are the questions that I try to raise.
You mentioned earlier that it wasn't called artificial intelligence before. What was it called?
Well, at the time that I was really doing a lot of work with it, it was we were calling them expert systems. And it was before we had created machine learning. And it was a way of basically taking vast amounts of data and saying, well, an expert in this, if you give it some certain environmental parameters, this is the environment, this is the data, this is the situation or the question that we need to ask. How would an expert go about solving that problem? And we actually had to go through and develop that data to say it was all, in a sense, it was a very, very elaborate if this then that, right, kind of programming, but it was basically drawing correlations between situations, certain data sets and certain solution sets. And so we were hard coding a lot of that in, and it was basically one of the earlier stages of the technology. As it's gone through phases, it's what we call the procedural phase or the rules-based phase, right, where we had certain rules of how the machine could respond to certain types of data. But it was really limited to that area of expertise. Now, and when the machine got out of that area of expertise, it actually had no insights at all. And so this was very early on. And we were actually working on, at the time, we were trying to, the next phase of that was then to say, well, first off, we need bigger data sets. So that was when we started building, I don't know if you're familiar with the term big data. It used to be that all data was managed in a very prescriptive, hierarchical database. That was what we called structured data. Everything had to fit into a category or a structure or a data type, a data field. And then as we moved to big data, we wanted to gather more data about all of the interactions on the internet and all of the information on the internet and all of this other world of information we were capturing, where it didn't necessarily fit into a structured environment, but we wanted to capture that data and then somehow create tokens to that data that we can connect this type of data with this type of question or this type of answer. And so you see Bing and Google and all of the search engines were based on that larger big data kind of model. And so the next stage after that was then saying, well, could we teach the machine how to basically learn to modify itself to get better at something? And that was the phase that was came out around 2011-ish or so. That was the phase that really started the modern age of what we're calling artificial intelligence. And then one of the other major things that happened, happened around 2018. Even at that point, most of the artificial intelligence applications that we had fit into, and there's multiple types of artificial intelligence, fit into what we call the ANI, the artificial narrow intelligence model. And that meant that it had a very, very narrow focus of what it had to be an expert on. And it was now machine learning how to do that expertise and how to solve those problems. But it really had very little context or visibility outside of that. So you might have one AI that was focusing on facial recognition. You might have another AI identifying other types of animals and plants and objects, right? So you have an AI that learns how to look at a picture and go from the pixel level of a picture to basically say, this is a giraffe. And you might have another AI that dealt with language, right? How do we speak? How do we communicate with each other? Another AI that dealt with how do you detect collisions based on distance and time and speed. And it wasn't until we started combining these AIs, text and images and video and sounds and other mathematical meanings, where we started combining the context of things, similar to how we work, right? So we don't work with just language. We work with language and sight and sounds and context and history and a number of things. Is when we started combining those things into what we call multimodality or multimodal. Modality meaning the type of content, text versus video versus image. Was when we started seeing a significant change, and we're talking like 10 times over 6 months or a year, of the programs improving their intelligence, because we've just now giving them the context of saying, when I show you a picture of a giraffe, you know that it's a giraffe. You can get to the text history of what a giraffe is and how it works and where it lives and what it eats and who its enemies and friends are. You now can start building the context of this knowledge. That was when we started seeing very rapid increases in the improvements of most AI systems. Was when we started taking them out of this very, very narrow range, and we put it in what we called, and some scientists were calling them golems, generative large language model multimodal machines. And these golems were the things that were really kind of becoming more powerful than their individual components.
Fascinating. And like everybody kind of, with all the craziness in the world that's going on, and you mentioned getting in the wrong hands. I mean, I don't think there's any politician at the moment all over the world that we can really trust. We've all seen that they're all controlled by different groups. What have you seen that's good that's being used with AI?
Well, that's a great question, because there really are, and one of the reasons I started getting involved in this very early on is because I saw a lot of potential good that we could do with computers in general, but AI to further the human experience and improve our global our global sense of wellness. Medical one, I think, is one of the ones that has the most promise. I think you're going to see AI as it gets more generative and it gets better at certain things, helping pharmaceuticals come up with medicines at record speeds. You'll see diagnostics. We're already seeing AI be able to read CAT scans and detect cancer cells far faster and more accurately than humans. And you're going to see a number of different ways that AI is going to be used to personalize medical care, so that it's not just, oh, you've got a disease, we think it's a severe version versus a mild version. They'll take your DNA, your chemical composition, your specific body chemistries to customize the prescription or the treatment for you. And I think that we'll see a lot more of Certainly in the medical field, I think will be one area that will benefit everybody. Now, I have to caption that by saying none of these benefits are going to be free. There's always going to be somebody we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars developing this technology. Somebody is going to want a return on their investment, which means somebody's going to wind up having to pay for these benefits at some point in time. So while we can talk about the general good for humanity, there's a wealth distribution component that has to go along with that conversation as well. We'll see international logistics. Anybody who's been involved in the trade on an international basis has to deal with the logistics of moving supply chain material from one factory in one country to another factory in another country to another factory in another country, is going to appreciate the complexity, the enormous problems of working out logistics. And AI is going to be able to work through a lot of those things faster than we can. Climate change, I think AI involved in some of the more complicated computer models that we have. AIs are much better at understanding patterns and dealing with vast amounts of data than most traditional computer models can.
So in that sense, just so I know, because I've had a lot of people on my Awakening show, a lot of the figures that they're given have been doctored, even with NASA and everything. They're making it look a million times worse than what it really is. I'm not saying there's nothing with all the plastic and all the stuff like that obviously has to be resolved, but there's a load of stuff that's actually a lie. And I mean, if we're getting the true information, it gives a true picture instead of somebody dictating what the way.
Well, that's one of the benefits. Yeah, exactly. Well, AI, it doesn't have the biases that we have. It's not worried about what somebody thinks about it. It's not worried about whether this is politically correct or whether this is politically doable. It's only worried about analyzing information and producing results. And I've actually seen some of the early AI climate models that are more negative, that are more concerning than the ones that are out there in the public, because they don't have to worry about making this politically correct. And so it can just look at the trends themselves. Now, I was actually involved in some of those early environmental studies as far back as the early 90s. I was actually in an oil company, and I happened to be in the board of directors room that day. I was invited as a guest. One of my jobs at the oil company was watching over our environmental capital spend. And so I was working with a lot of our own scientists on some of these things. And we were able to propose a meeting with the board where we brought I sponsored some of these scientists coming into the boardroom to talk about some of the research they were doing. This was an oil company doing our own research about the connection between the thinning ice in the North Sea and in the Arctic areas with fossil fuel, burning of fossil fuels and CO2 emissions and some of the geologic studies that span hundreds of millions of years. And I witnessed when the chairman of the board got up from his seat 5-10 minutes into this presentation and went into a red-faced, spittled tirade, just threatening to firing anybody that brought this up again, because this kind of information doesn't sell oil and we sell oil. And so I was in matter of fact, he threatened to fire anybody who brought it up. The CFO, or the chief financial officer who I was there with, leaned over to me and basically said that if I mentioned anything about this meeting to anybody in the company, I would be fired. And so I was there when we started kind of manipulating the information so that we can continue to sell oil without consequence. And so I don't believe the issue is whether or not we know the issues of climate change. I think the issues we've been kicking this can down the road for 40 years. The issues really relate to whether or not we have the political will to make the types of social changes we need to make to get to where we need to be. And right now, the strategy is put this on the consumer. Well, you have to conserve more, or you have to drive less, or you have to change your lifestyle. But the industrial uses of fossil fuel, the commercial uses of fuel, Those things are the slowest to change, and those are the biggest contributors. So we've gotten to the point where it's at least in the political mindset. People are now becoming more aware that we're kind of on this track, this road to our own harm, and it's progressing more quickly than we had thought. But we still haven't really ironed out who's really responsible and who should really bear the most pain in the short term to get us into a more sustainability. So so when we talk about AI helping us build better models, that's great, but it won't necessarily change our political and humanistic tendencies to deny that there's a problem until it's a really bad problem. And so I think we're kind of on that path. I know that there's a lot of debate about whether it's man-made or whether it's the natural cycles or a combination of both. I certainly think that there's enough data to suggest that we're contributing to it pretty massively. And maybe it is a natural cycle, but it's a natural cycle that's being driven by and being accelerated by human activity.
And I mean, at the end of the day, as well, the AI, the programming and everything it can be biased based on whichever one is being used. Because I've even seen, because sometimes people think, like a Google search, it can be down to the question you're asking. And some people, unfortunately, they think this is gold standard. It's just told me this is fact.
Well, AI, we're still dealing with a lot of the quality issues in terms of that, what we call the misalignment or the hallucination kind of factor of AI. Well, it will go find a lot of information that sounds right, and it'll tell you something, but it's not true. That it's called a phenomenon called hallucination, and they're currently working on that as well. But as a computer modeler, there's always subjective information. Hard data you can put in. There's always subjective data you can put in, and you're always working toward that, minimizing that deviation between the two. And but you never eliminate it entirely because the future is unknown, and there's so many factors that we would. I think as we get, though, I think we're probably getting to the point. I would say within the next 7 years, where we'll get to a point where I think we can get rid of a good portion of some of that by combining binary modeling with quantum computing. Quantum computing, the ability for a quantum computer to analyze these complex things much, much faster than a traditional supercomputer is amazing. And it uses by basically saying, well, let's look at all of the scenarios at once. And kind of run all of those at once to see which one, the one that really kind of plays out. And, when I was doing modeling, one of the things you're looking for that, you would test your model to say, well, if my model had to predict last quarter, how close would it have come? So you're looking for that level of deviation that gets down to the very, very minute levels where you can. But there's always something that could happen at the last minute, something unforeseen, something that the modeler didn't foresee. That a sunspot, right, at a time when we didn't expect it could change things. And so there always are things that could impact the model, a new industry, a sudden growth of mining for lithium that changes the water structure in a certain region. There's always things that a model, right now we're dealing with models that are inherently limited, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong. It just simply means that their deviation could get smaller the more information we have. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And just jumping back to the climate, because like I've put up videos where I think it's like nearly 200 years they had the car that was run by electric. I know even Ford had a car running on hemp, made of hemp. I saw solar panels that were 100 years old. And I've seen stuff recently where they have gas based on water that they can actually do the cooking and everything. So the problem is, there is stuff out there that's not needed. It's all down to the money because we're all slaves, whether people like it or not. The whole world are slaves. And I think once you get out of the money situation where it's not about taxing and making a person a slave for life, it could be changed like that, whereas people think there's no hope.
I think that Yeah, slave is a strong word, but I certainly think we're vessels of the state in a sense like that. We can only buy what we're the products on the marketplace. I think there's a lot of people who would like more efficient energy. We don't see it because the oil companies have such a hold. They make so much money. They donate so much money to politicians that they have a real control over that narrative and those agendas. And so, as I said, we've been kicking the environmental climate change can down the road for as far as I've known, 40 years, but without really a lot of progress other than having it more on the minds of more people. If you had said climate change 30 years ago, nobody would have even known what you were talking about. So at least we're getting into the mindset that something's going on. But you're right, we're not in control. Even democracies that want to vote for their candidates aren't in control because those candidates largely are bought off by somebody else. And so it can be discouraging. But maybe that's where I go back to my childhood. I grew up with impossible scenarios. I grew up with the scenario saying, I'm a 13-year-old kid. What am I ever going to do with my life? You know, how am I ever going to be anybody? I don't have anybody. I don't have a family. I don't have support. I don't even have decent clothes to wear to a job. And so but yet I could not allow myself to give up hope that somehow, even if the world wouldn't change around me, I could change within it. And there's always that hope that we do still have control of our own psyche, our own attitudes, our own spirit, we have a influence on our own destiny. And that's where I think the power comes in, strength comes in. Some of the most incredible people in history aren't people who lived through great times that were very easy. Those are the people who had to overcome challenges to become something great. And those who tend to be our heroes. And so I think that we're just in a very heroic time in the world, where I think the heroes of the world will come up, even if they're not well known. I think you're going to see a lot of heroes, and you're going to see a lot of people who are really holding on to their integrity when there's a lot of push to give up and just give into the system. And we see it. We see people all the time just giving into the system, giving into the trends, giving into whatever they're told on TikTok. I mean, I look at some of these things like these TikTok challenges of getting kids to do incredibly stupid, dangerous, life-threatening things, but it's that sense of peer pressure that they can't can't withstand. That's the sad part. But we're going to see a time where it's a very heroic time. People are going to come out of become the best of themselves as well.
Listen, Guy, thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. So you might, obviously you've the 3 books. You might mention the other 2 books as well. Swarm is the one.
Absolutely.
And that's where they can find you as well.
Well, Swarm won the Reader's Favorite, an International Book Festival or Book Award, and won the Reader's Favorite Gold Award a couple years ago. The sequel to Swarm, which is called The Last Ark, just won the Silver Award last month. And that The Last Ark will take you from the characters in Swarm. We'll talking about the combination of binary and quantum computing, but you'll also learn about, and this is true, 2 real Arks of the Covenant that still exist to this day. Both of them have long histories associated with them. Both of them came out of Israel. Both of them were used in temple worship, and both of them came to light in news stories in the last 3 to 6 years that were never covered in the major press. So fascinating stories in that one. The 3rd book, The Curse of Cortez, always one of my favorites, was a finalist for the book award winning, but didn't win the Reader's Favorite. That one took me 12 years to research the history, archaeology, Mayan mythology that went into that story. One of the fun story. It's got humor, romance, paranormal, adventure, archaeology, treasure, lost civilizations. It's a great book. And you can find them all at GuyMorrisBooks.com. You can get links to buy them either on Amazon or other places for digital copies. We have Swarm and The Last Ark are now also on Audible. If you're don't have time to read, the narrator is a New York television actor who's also a tenor for the New York Metropolitan Opera. He's got an amazing, wonderful, articulate, great voice. He's a great narrator. And I'm also on social media. So mainly Guy Morse Books on Twitter, official Guy Morse Books on Facebook, and author Guy Morse on Instagram.
So I'll make sure I put the links, both the audio and the video. And just finally, because I had said finally, is there anybody taking it up to make a movie? Because as I'm reading and I go, this needs to be a movie.
I would love to make all of the movies. I'm still trying to figure out how to find that right person who's going to get, it's all about relationships and finding the right person. It's difficult to break into that industry. I've actually been tempted, had one person tell me that I should, after I finish my next book, that I should take some time and write a screenplay, and that might help get me farther. But yeah, I think they're all, in my head, I'm always seeing these as movies, and so yeah, I'd love to see that happen. I think they would make fun movies.
Well, hopefully
one of Manchester Storm is James Bond meets Indiana Jones. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying the book, and glad you're enjoying the concepts in there, and the amount of realism and fact, but I also wanted to kind of make sure I created characters that people could enjoy.
No, your writing skills are incredible. So I'll make sure I put the links both on the audio, the video, and not only is this going out in the speaking, but because of all the stuff we've covered, I'll make sure I put it out in the Awakening podcast as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So you'll find all everything about me on podfather.me is basically the best way to find all the podcasts. Until next week, take care. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. As mentioned at the start, you can find my 6 podcasts on roycollin.com or scan the QR code if you're looking to start a podcast or do a podcasting tour, help with that. Also, if you're looking for a virtual assistant, we also have that service. And you can help the show by visiting the store, supporting our sponsors, or making a donation. Until next week, take care.